Our next Alabama author is Frazine Taylor.
Thank you. Bulavanaka, Onalaka Kesiwa, Oya, Derolako. Now I know that you are wondering what I have just said. Well, it is a language called Fijian and is only spoken in Fiji, which is located in the South Pacific. To translate, I said, Bulavanaka, how is your health? Then I said, Onalaka Kesiwa, translated, do you want to go fishing? The response was, Oya Derolako, translated means, let's go. Now those were the only Fijian phrases that I remembered as a Peace Corps worker, and lucky for me, they happened to fit the researching concept for family history, because sometimes when you go fishing, you catch a fish or several, and sometimes you don't even get a bite. This is true for researching your ancestors. Sometimes you find them, and sometimes you don't even get a bite. But we keep fishing and hope and look for a guide. That's exactly what I did when I began to look for my family some years ago, and was not having too much luck in finding them in many of the records that I thought that they should have been in. So I stepped back and analyzed my searching methods. One thing I realized, that I was a trained librarian and knew how to research. That was the first mistake I made. The first thing I needed to do was to get several how-to books on genealogy. I looked at several books that I thought would be a help for me. For example, The Researcher's Guide to American Genealogy. I said to myself, now I got the tools and I don't need to go any further. I began looking in each of the books that I looked at and discovered that sometimes there were only footnotes about African-American research or a couple of paragraphs in the chapter. For example, in the book that I mentioned, The Research Guide to American Genealogy, out of 609 pages, page 141 gives a list the Journal of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society's newsletter. With that effort providing nothing, I looked for books written by my Jones family. After looking in vain for the surname Jones of color in the book sections in archives and libraries and finding nothing, and using all of the tools that were available to me at the time, I still did not have a clue to where my ancestors might have been located in Alabama, other than Elmo County. I took the research one step further. Remember when I began to research some years ago, we had not the surge of the internet on genealogy, so I did not have that option. I went back to searching the books for African American resources, and I found the book Black Genesis, written in 1978 by Dr. James Rose and his associates. And he says in this book, they say at least, this volume is an attempt to create an interest in black family ancestry in order to retrieve a large part of history and ancestry which has all too frequently been overlooked, ignored, and sometimes desolated. Three tasks for restoring of this aspect of history are suggested here. 1, helping the novice in black family ancestry to begin searching for his or her own roots in Western soil. 2, encouraging the development of black genealogical research by suggesting and illustrating areas where records need to be diligently uncovered and published. And 3, suggesting ways Genealogical materials can be used to re-examine history. And they go on to say, very little has been published which deals with black genealogical research. Before I began working at the archives, at the Alabama Archives, I had thought about my family and its history. Although when I was growing up, I was learning about the family from the mouth of my father, mother, aunt, uncle, and so forth. But I did not know at the time that I would have to use that information later as a tool to aid me in collecting additional data on my family. So, how did I get to this place in my life of writing a research guide? Well, it was not easy, but a necessity. As I was listening to questions that were being asked by African Americans on how do I find my ancestors, it was not enough for me to say, start with yourself and work backwards. Because for African Americans, working backwards will eventually back you up to a brick wall if you don't know the records that you will need to work with. So when Randall Williams of New South Books approached me one day and told me that I needed to write a book, I just looked at him and said to myself, he is unaware that I was in the last row in English class, and I have yet to diagram a sentence correctly. But he assured me that I knew my subject and for me to just write, which I did. And another thing I realized, that there were no specifically guides to help African American researchers of Alabama records. So, formal instructions on how to research a family's history plays an important role in tracking down the branches of the family tree. However, nothing beats the resource that maps the way. The idea for this guidebook rose out of my lecturing throughout the country and having noticed that reference guides on African American family history resources seem to exist for every state except Alabama. Whereas Alabama's African American resource information had remained only a chapter in many of the basic family history resource books. This was regrettable not merely for researchers of African American history in Alabama, but in fact, Alabama's records play an especially important role in U.S. family history research because of the migration patterns of Alabama freedmen. First to the urban areas of Alabama, and then to the northern cities, a trend that continued throughout the first part of the 20th century. The flight of blacks from the southern states scattered families, and today make it a challenge, but not an impossibility, to research African American family history. This resource guide is intended to help identify and locate the resources for not only for African Americans, but for anyone researching family history in archives, librarians, and county courthouse throughout the state of Alabama and the United States. Thank you.